everyone, and welcome back to Pro Motors. And today in this video, I'm going to be discussing with you how to install a clutch, how does a clutch work, and also I'm going to have a demonstration for you so you can have a visual aid in how everything connects together from engine to transmission. The basic functions of a clutch is to be able to connect the rotational energy from the engine back to the transmission. And it does that with a pressure plate, a friction disc, and a flywheel. Okay, all these components come together to be able to connect the engine and transmission together. I'm going to show you this demonstration here in how everything works together. So you have the flywheel here that connects to the back of the engine. This rotates right here, and you have this friction disc. The friction disc sits right in between the pressure plate and the flywheel, and it sandwiches in right here, just like this. Okay, so then you have the pressure plate, and the function of the pressure plate is to insert pressure onto the flywheel, just like this. So when the engine is rotating, this friction plate can grip and grab and rotate with the engine. But the friction plate does a very critical role when it comes to connecting the engine and transmission together. Let me show you. The friction plate sits right in here, and you insert it right into the input shaft onto the transmission. It slides in like this, okay? And when the clutch is engaged, it rotates with the clutch. When the clutch is disengaged, it slows down or stops spinning. So let me show you exactly what happens. The engine is on, the flywheel is rotating, this friction disc starts to spin inside here, and since the transmission is in neutral, the drive shaft does not move. And let me show you. I am rotating and the drive shaft is not moving. But now watch what happens when I put it in first. Okay, I have it in first gear and I'm gonna rotate. You can see the drive shaft is moving. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and put it in sixth gear. Okay, the drive shaft is moving, but it's moving faster, it's moving quicker. The gear ratio has changed. So now I'm going to put it in reverse. Okay, it's in reverse. The drive shaft rotates in the opposite direction. So I have right in front of me, I have a flywheel, we have the friction disc, and we have the pressure plate. So you could have a better visual in how everything goes together. You have the friction disc lines up here in the center. You have the pressure plate sits right over everything. It sandwiches the whole kit together, okay? And it sits kind of like this, okay? So right here on this diaphragm on the clutch, you can see it has all these fingers, all these little teeth that are right here. Now, this is the part where the pressure plate disengages the friction disc from the flywheel. And let me show you what happens. This is a slave cylinder. This device right here inserts hydraulic pressure. So it usually sits something like this, okay? It will be sandwiched back, and then when you insert hydraulic pressure into here, it pushes these little fingers down, releasing the tension that's being created from the pressure plate onto the flywheel. So when you press in on your pedal, you insert pressure into here, hydraulic pressure, it pushes out, it disengages the pressure plate and releases the pressure from the friction disc. And inside this transmission, you can see the slave cylinder sits right in the center right here, and this is what's providing the disengagement and engagement of the clutch. Okay, so hydraulic fluid will come through here. Okay, we could see some of it, it's shooting out of here. Hydraulic fluid will come through here, it would disengage the pressure plate, the friction disc will slow down, and I will show you, I will give you a little demonstration here. Okay, you press on your clutch pedal, the friction disc slows down or stops spinning, okay? It lets you shift it into gear, switch the gear, and then you release the pedal, engaging the pressure plate again, and this starts to rotate. So right now in front of me, I have put a clutch pedal. I put the master cylinder, some lines, the slave cylinder, and I have the pressure plate here. So I want to show you the sequence and how everything kind of works together. So it all starts here in the clutch pedal. You can see there's movement right here on this lever, okay? When you press down on a clutch pedal, like this, you press down on it, there's pressure being inserted here on this diaphragm or this cylinder, okay? This is filled with hydraulic fluid. The hydraulic fluid then later is transferred into this line. From this line, it moves all the way to the slave cylinder, and from the slave cylinder, it inserts pressure on top of here, these fingers on the diaphragm, releasing the clutch. So now that we have a better understanding how a clutch engages and disengages, let's talk about performance clutches. So when it comes to a performance application, the one thing you're going to have to consider is as you're increasing the pressure on the pressure plate, okay, you're going to also be increasing the pressure on components like this slave cylinder, okay? There's going to be a lot more pressure being inserted on here. So you're going to always have to consider, do your research and see if you need to upgrade the slave cylinder, because in this situation on this 370Z engine or G37, that is the situation where this plastic stock slave cylinder breaks under pressure because they're just not made that well. So when it comes to a clutch, remember the only thing that's connecting the engine and transmission together is the friction plate. So whenever you're going up on horsepower or you're creating some more torque, the first thing you're going to want to do is upgrade the clutch, and you're going to want to get a clutch that provides more pressure from that pressure plate squeezing onto the flywheel like this, and this sandwiches everything together so you could transfer that power all the way back. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a little bit about the flywheel. And in this 370Z, okay, and you might have something similar in your vehicle, this is a dual mass flywheel. And what that means is there's two separate parts, okay, in this flywheel. So you're going to see I'm going to be able to move this back and forth, and this is not normal. This one is damaged. It's supposed to be spring loaded. So when you're engaging the clutch and disengaging the clutch, it could dampen some of that movement created from the clutch when it engages and disengages. This is a bad flywheel here. So in this situation, I decided to go with a aftermarket flywheel from Z1, and what I was able to do with purchasing this flywheel was I eliminated that dual mass flywheel situation. This is a solid flywheel. It's actually really heavy. And with this application, with this flywheel, I am able to run the stock clutch with it, because I want to run the stock clutch in this setup because it's going to be a daily driven vehicle, and I really don't want to have the clutch pedal being really stiff and hard. I'm not going to really be racing this vehicle. It's not going to create that much power that I would need to upgrade into a performance or street performance clutch like I have here from Z1 as well. There's nothing wrong with that clutch. It's good, but I would rather have a stock feel to the clutch pedal. So that's something you should consider whenever you decide, hey, I am gonna replace the clutch. Should I go with stock? Should I go with aftermarket? You should always consider how much power you're making and what you're going to be using the vehicle for. Since I am not racing this vehicle, I am just going to go with the stock one, and it's going to hold up just fine. So right now I am going to show you how to install a clutch system into a 370Z or a G37 engine. It's going to consist of a flywheel installment. We're going to do the pressure plate and friction disc. We're also going to replace the slave cylinder, the pilot bushing. I ordered some new bolts for the flywheel, and of course the main seal. These two parts are very critical when you replace any type of clutch system. Since you're there, you should go ahead and replace the pilot bushing and the main seal, the rear main seal. It's always a great idea to do it. And to tie it all together, we're going to use some red Loctite. So right now we're going to go ahead and get started, and the first thing we're going to do is I am going to replace this rear main seal. So I have the flywheel and clutch disassembled. Everything has been removed. So I don't have the correct tool to remove this rear main seal, and it sits right in here just like this, and you can see it right here. So what I'm going to be using, and you guys could do the same thing at home, is I'm going to pick a drill bit, a small one, okay? So exactly the size that I'm using here is a 532's drill bit, and I am going to make sure on the stock one it fits right in the center, okay? So I have it here, and I'm going to be drilling into the center of this main seal. And then after I have a hole, I'm going to be using this pick with a little hammer, and I'm going to poke it in, and I'm going to pull this main seal out of the way. And let me show you what that looks like right now. Okay, so I have made a hole in this main seal. So now I'm going to use this pick and drive it in with the hammer. Okay, and as they get old, they get stuck. But there we go, it is off. The first thing I like to do, and you should do as well, is you should always compare the parts that you're replacing. Make sure that they're the correct size and they look like they're the correct diameter. It looks like they're the same, and it should be, because this is the original OEM part. So now we're going to go ahead and install it. But before we do that, we are going to want to lube the inside of this, right inside here. And what I like to use is some silicone compound. So this stuff works great. It doesn't really eat away at any O-rings or any rubber. So if you're installing any type of rubber seal or anything that could get pinched, like this situation here, we could bind it or pinch it when we're installing it. Always consider lubing the gasket up. I'm gonna go ahead and lube the inside of this, okay? This is the part that there's rotation involved inside here. So this isn't gonna increase the lubrication for the rotation. This is just for the install at this point. And then the outside, I'm gonna leave it dry, okay? So you're gonna bring the seal up to the back of the crank. You have it in position, just like this. Now, at this point right here, you could use a special tool to drive this seal in, and I recommend you using it if you have it. But if you don't, you could always use a hammer, okay? But I'm going to use a different type of hammer than this. I'm gonna go grab my plastic one so I could be very gentle when I'm driving it in, and I'm gonna show you exactly what that looks like right now. So I'm gonna be using this little hammer. I'm gonna be using the black part. It's a little bit harder, but it won't do any damage to the seal when I start to tap it in. And what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna start at one corner and go in a circular manner, rotation, and you're gonna start to drive it in slowly. So you're gonna do light taps, and it's gonna slowly start to go in. So you're gonna continue to finesse around here, okay, until you have everything properly seated. And then what I like to do is I like to use this part right here that's not as hard, and I use a hammer and I come behind it and I go ahead and tap it in. And you can see everything's nice and flush and it's properly seated back. So next in the process, we're going to go ahead and replace this pilot bushing, and we're going to be using this tool to extract it out. And let me show you how that works. So here we have the good pilot bushing, and this is the old one. So basically this tool, what it does is you insert it inside here and it's going to grip and grab the pilot bushing. You open it up like this. It locks it into place. Okay, so now that pilot bushing, let's make believe this tool is inserted in here. The pilot bushing can't go anywhere. It's got these little notches right here. It's holding in place, and then you start to twist this nut right here like this, and it'll start to extract it or pull it out of the crank because it sits right here, right in the center. So I'm going to do exactly the same process right here. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the tool. Okay, it's flush all the way in the back. It's holding in the back. Okay, it's as far as it can go in. I'm twisting here. It is now gripping and grabbing that pilot bearing or the pilot bushing. So now I'm going to start to tighten this nut until I could let go of the tool and it no longer moves. Okay, just like that. So now I'm going to want to make sure that it's sitting centered on this crank right here, because this is very important. If you're off centered, you can damage the crank. So we want to make sure everything looks nice and square and we're on center, just like that. So now I'm going to start to tighten this nut, and it's going to extract that pilot bushing out. So take your time when you're doing this. We're going to go slow and steady. Okay, I could already feel that it's moving out. So you're going to see as I tighten that nut, it's going to start to come outside. It's going to get extracted out. I know if you go out in the internet, there's going to be many different ways in how to extract a pilot bearing or a pilot bushing, but when you have the right tool, it always makes it easier. It's worth spending $22 in Harbor Freight for one of these, and it just makes the job go a lot smoother. So if you're interested, I got this one in Harbor Freight. Works just fine. So now it's time to install the new pilot bushing. So basically, what you're going to look for, if you don't have the proper tool to install it, like I don't, once again. So what I'm using is a 1/2 inch socket, and I discovered that the 14 mil socket is the same size as the pilot bushing. You don't want to go over and you don't want to go under. You want the same size, same thickness. Okay, you can see it's almost identical. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna grab a little bit of lube. Okay, you're gonna have some lubrication, and you're gonna run some of it around the outside of the pilot bushing. Just like that, and some on the inside of this crank, so it could slide nice and smooth when you start driving it in. Now that I have everything nice and lubed, I'm going to present it to the back of the crank and I'm gonna lightly tap it in. Okay. Now it's seated, it's just starting to go inside. Now that it's kind of held into place, now I'm gonna grab the socket and drive it in. And you want firm, light taps. You don't want to get too aggressive. You want to kind of massage it into place. You don't want to go really crazy and start slamming your hammer on here. So you got to take your time and observe what's going on, making sure it's going in straight. It started to go in. It's about halfway in now. So I'm going to continue to drive it in very gently. And what you want to do is make sure it's not binding, it's not going crooked, and it's going in smooth. So I'm almost to the back, and you know that you'll get there because the tone of the tapping will change. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove the extension for this part so I could listen for the tone change. And there it is. It's a solid sound. I could feel it in the hammer. That's as far as it can go. Okay? You want to stop there. And that's it. It is inserted into the back of the crank. Okay, now that we have the pilot bushing on there and we have the rear main seal replaced, it's time to go ahead and install this flywheel. And like I said before, we're going to be installing it with brand new bolts. I always would recommend you getting new bolts for the crank when installing this. You could go with the OEM like I have, or you could upgrade to aftermarket ones. Always pay attention to the back of the flywheel with this little notch, especially here on the 370Z. Remember that these teeth right here is what sends the signal to the back of the crank. I'm gonna make sure to align it. This goes in here. I'm gonna make sure I do that, because if no, the engine will not start. So I am going to pre-prep all these bolts with Loctite. Gonna just run just a little bit on the edge, just like that. So these are all pre-prepped, ready to be installed. So I'm going to start all of these by hand. Okay, so now that all these have been started, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down. Not too much. I'm just going to snug them down until they touch the plate. Notice how I'm using a star pattern to make sure to seat this flywheel on there. I'm not going really tight on one side and then going really tight right here. I'm using a star pattern, and I'm kind of walking the flywheel onto the crank. So whenever you guys are installing any type of new part, something critical like a flywheel, you're torquing down heads, you're torquing down anything, always look up what the manufacturer recommends. And that's exactly what I have done here. I went to Z1's website, and we can see here for the 370Z and the G37 flywheel torque specs, it's calling for 65 foot-pounds. And you can see for the pressure plate, there's actually 2 steps. And we'll get to that part later, but they also said recommend to use Loctite. it says 271 or equivalent. So that's exactly what I use, 271. So always do what the manufacturer recommends. This will assure that when you're installing something, if something was to go wrong, it's not something that you did wrong, it's just there was a failure in the part, not that you did something wrong when you installed it. So for this next part, since we're going to be using the torque wrench, I already pulled mine out, and I want to emphasize this. Don't use an impact gun. Do not use an impact gun, okay? If you don't want to use a torque wrench, that's fine. Do it by hand, but this is the last thing you want to use. If you want to see what would happen if you use an impact gun on this flywheel, look at the video that I have where I replaced the clutch on the 370Z. I believe the previous owner used the impact gun on the back of that crank, and you can see exactly what happened. It's not going to be pretty. So never ever use this on a flywheel. Use a torque wrench and do things the right way the first time. So I have this set to 65 since you cannot see a 60, okay, or a 65. You could go to 75. You know the next notch is 70, and then you have 65, and it's right there, and we're locked, ready to go. So whenever you're using a torque wrench, you want to use a smooth motion. You don't want to jerk it. You want to have the tool do the work for you, so you could hear the click or the beat, depending if you have a digital one or not. So whenever you're torquing down one of these flywheels, okay, you're gonna run into the situation that when it comes time to torque things down, it's the crank is gonna want to turn on you, just like this. Okay, so what I'm gonna be using here is I have this bar. This is actually used for serpentine belts, and I'm gonna be using the bolts used for the pressure plate. So the pressure plate sits on here, and I'm gonna use the bolts with this bar together to kind of hold the flywheel into place to keep it from rotating. So this is gonna be keeping the flywheel from rotating when I start to torque things down. So I'm gonna start here. And again, nice and smooth until you hear the click. Okay, we're good on that one. So here we have the flywheel, we have the friction disc, and we have the pressure plate. You're always going to want to remove the oil. There's oil that's in the back of these flywheels and the pressure plate. You're going to want to clean that off with something. So what you should be trying to use is some type of brake cleaner. This works excellent. You're going to spray a little bit on the flywheel itself. You can see the difference in color, how it has removed some of the oils off of there. Okay, going to spray a little bit, and you're going to wipe it away. Okay. You're going to spray a little bit more. You do it twice. And wipe away. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing to the pressure plate. So if you have any type of oils that's contaminating the friction disc, it's going to not let it do its job and grip and grab how it's supposed to. So always clean the flywheel and the pressure plate. So next we're going to be installing the friction disc and the pressure plate. But in order to install it, you're going to be using a centering tool. So it will look something like this. So in order for us to center the friction disc, we use a centering tool. So when it comes time to install the transmission with the input shaft, it could align easier. You're still gonna fight it, everyone fights it, but it'll be centered and it'll go into place easier. And like I was explaining before, this plastic tool, this centering tool, it's just a pretend input shaft. You can see this is the real one and this is the pretend, and we use this just to align the friction disc. So just like before with the flywheel, with the pressure plate bolts, I'm gonna pre-prep all of them, put some Loctite on there, okay? Always recommended. You should always follow what they recommend. So here's a great tip. Before you install the pressure plate and try to sandwich the friction disc on there, go ahead and try to figure out where are the holes going to line up, because they only line up one way, and go ahead and make a mark on the pressure plate and on the flywheel so you know where to put it. So when it comes to the friction disc, you're going to see there's a flat side and there's a side that has some type of groove. This, or it's got like a bevel or sticks out. This part sticks out this way, okay? It does not go inside here. It sits this way, like this. So what you're gonna do next is you're gonna get the friction disc, and you're gonna get the centering tool, and you're gonna go ahead and insert it into where the pilot bushing is, okay? And now that's holding it into place, and you don't have to struggle or fight anything. So now that we have the friction disc right where it needs to go, I'm going to line the marks that I marked on the pressure plate together. Okay. And now I can start to insert the bolts all the way around. You always want to do all of them by hand, never with any type of impact gun. So now that I have everything started by hand, I'm going to use my little ratchet, electric ratchet, and just kind of snug all of them. And I'm going to use the same star pattern that I've been using before. So for this next step, I'm also going to be using another torque wrench. This one's a little bit smaller, that could handle 11 foot-pounds. And there is a two-step process in connecting and installing this pressure plate. You're going to go 11 foot-pounds, and then you're going to go 29 foot-pounds. There. That's the click. That's good. So we already have done step 1, so now we're going to go to step 2, and that's 29 foot-pounds. I am going to do the same start pattern until I hear a click, and then once I hear an audible click in all of them, I'll go ahead and do it once more to reassure everything is nice and tight and snug. So now that we have everything nice and secured, and I went twice around and I made sure everything was nice and tight, you're going to go ahead and remove the centering tool. So you're going to grab here in the center and you're just going to pull straight out, just like that. So that's all we have for today. I hope this gives you a better idea in how a clutch works or how to install a clutch. Always, whenever you're replacing one of these, pay attention to the flywheel, to the surface. You can see on this flywheel, not only it's bad, you can see right here there's a lot of hot spots. You wouldn't want to install a new clutch, a new friction disc on this surface right here with all these hot spots. You would want to have it resurfaced, but on a dual mass flywheel like this one, I believe the rule is you cannot resurface it. So you would need a new flywheel regardless. But in other flywheels, like a solid flywheel, you can resurface it and then install your clutch. So always do your research like you're probably doing right now. You're researching how to install a clutch or how it works. Always do your research. It all depends on your manufacturer and what they recommend. So whatever I showed here, the torque sequence and the torque specs, these are strictly for the Nissan, for the 370Z and the G37. Okay, it doesn't, if you have a Corvette, don't follow those torque specs. Find out, do some research and find out what are the torque specs. But regardless, overall the process and how to install a clutch, it's all pretty much universal. So whatever I showed you here, it's going to help with your install.